Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight for a conversation surrounding the analysis, ideas, vision, and hope presented in the 15th anniversary edition of Beyond Homelessness, Christian Faith in a Culture of Displacement, which published by Erdman's Publishing in September of 2023. My name is William Hearn, and I serve as the Advertising, Promotions, and Events Coordinator here at Erdman's Publishing Company. It is my great honor and privilege to bring you, in partnership with Hearts and Minds Bookstore, tonight's conversation with the authors of Beyond Homelessness. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I wanted to iterate just a few quick announcements and housekeeping items. Excuse me. Firstly, tonight's webinar will be recorded. After the conclusion of tonight's events, each registrant will receive an automated email with a link where you can access the recording of tonight's conversation. The recording will also be uploaded to Erdman's YouTube page, which I highly encourage you to subscribe to, as many more engaging webinar events like this one tonight will be featured on our YouTube page. Secondly, if you have any questions that you would like to raise during our Q&A segment of tonight's conversation, please utilize the chat function that's located on the right-hand side of your screen. You can feel free to jot down any questions that you might have, and Byron, our host for tonight, will be reading those to our authors. The winner of tonight's book giveaway will be announced immediately following that Q&A segment, so be sure to stay tuned. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's speakers. Joining me on the stage now is none other than Mr. Byron Borger. A little bit about Byron. Before opening the Hearts and Minds Bookstore in Pennsylvania, Byron worked in college ministry for the Coalition of Christian Outreach, working on staff of Emmanuel Presbyterian Church in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, as well as serving as the associate director of the Thomas Merton Center in Pittsburgh. He and his wife, Beth, opened Hearts and Minds, an independent bookstore in Dallastown, Pennsylvania in 1982. And besides managing the small town shop, he has served congregations, denominations, and organizations as conference booksellers, has spoken extensively about relating Christian faith to society at clergy convocations, colleges, church retreats, and events. He has worked in social change organizations and has written for several print and online journals, including Comment and CPJ's Capital Commentary. Byron reviews books regularly at Book Notes, the Hearts and Minds newsletter. He attends First Presbyterian Church in New York, Pennsylvania. Byron, thank you so much for helping me co-organize this event and your willingness to lead such an engaging conversation.
Well, thank you very, very much. It's great to be here.
Of course. Joining us next is Stephen Bouma-Prediger. He is one of the co-authors of Beyond Homelessness. Steve is the Leonard and Marjorie Moss Professor of Reformed Theology at Hope College. Steve speaks regularly on environmental issues, and you might even catch him whitewater rafting or backpacking through the Adirondacks as part of a 3-week course that he leads at Hope College called Ecological Theology and Ethics. Welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Brian Walsh, another co-author of Beyond Homelessness. Brian is a retired campus minister at the University of Toronto. He is also a lecturer at Bible Remixed, an online resource that offers interactive courses and workshops that focus on radical discipleship. Brian also serves as the president of a place called Home, a homeless shelter and affordable housing provider in Lindsay, Ontario. Also, I recently learned that Brian and I share a deep passion for acoustic and bluegrass roots music, which I was pleasantly surprised by. So thank you, Brian. Thank you for being here. And now, without further ado, I will hand the conversation over to Byron. If you have any questions at all that you would like Byron to ask the authors, please be sure to post that in the chat. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, William, and thank you for Erdman's for publishing this great book and for inviting us to have this conversation. Brian is one of my oldest adult friends. I think he was one of the very first speakers to ever come to our store, our little store in Dallastown, 35, 40 years ago. And Steve's been someone I've admired forever and got to hang out with this fall up at Hope College. We had met before in front of a Bruce Coburn concert, in fact, once. But Steve and Brian, it's a delight to be with you. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell the audience a little bit about other books you've written. Maybe not on Erdman's, but I'm sure Erdman's won't mind, just to kind of set the stage for other work you've done so they just know how much I admire your books. And then I'll invite you just to chime in and say something else about yourself if you want to, anything else you might want people to know, just as authors of this book, celebrating the 15th anniversary edition of it, and we'll talk about that too. But just to get started, Brian wrote a book years ago with Richard Middleton, really important co-author, Richard Middleton, called Transforming Vision. And it may be a little dated, but I still love it. And it is about what some people call a Christian worldview, and it offers sort of a critique of some of the societal idols in light of this vision of a whole life understanding of redemption. The last chapter is about young students working together philosophically to form communities that can change the world. So I'm a fan of this, and it was one of his early books. He also wrote one on postmodernism called Truth is Stranger Than It Used to Be. That is one of my all-time favorite books, again, with Richard Middleton, who wrote something online about it just recently. Brian did a little book that was recently expanded and then put out again called Subversive Christianity. There's some talks and sermons and public addresses he's given here. A little short book, but it is one of the most powerful things I have read in my life. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone over this. His friend N.T. Wright wrote the foreword. This is a great, radical, serious book of what it would look like to image God in our dangerous times, as the subtitle puts it, an allusion to Bruce Cockburn, of course. Brian did a remarkable book with his wife Sylvia Kiesmott on Colossians called Colossians Remix, and then did another one somewhat similar to it, a very creative, contemporary, fresh interpretation of Romans called Romans Disarmed. So Colossians Remix and Romans Disarmed, some of the most important New Testament stuff I've ever read in my life. So I'm a big fan of Brian's work, and I've admired him forever, and glad he's going to be with us to talk about this 15th anniversary of Beyond Homelessness. Now, Steve, on the other hand, has also done stuff, and for years we've carried his things. I think the first thing I ever discovered of him, which is a book he edited by somebody he studied with, Joseph Sittler, studied about at the University of Chicago he was, right, Steve?
Correct.
And this is collections of this Lutheran theologian on notions of grace and the ecological implications of all that. What a great academic kind of collection of Sittler's work that was. But then you got busy doing your own stuff, For the Beauty of the Earth, which I, to this day, still say is one of the best books on creation care and environmental studies. It's a Christian vision for creation care, just sums it up beautifully, thoughtful enough, academic enough, but not too academic. Anybody could read this. It's really important. But then you did this other one called Earth Keeping and Character, which again is just a spectacular book about the notion of character. And we're going to come back to this in a bit, but exploring a Christian sort of ecological virtue, you call it. I guess in environmental studies, that's the thing, ecological virtue. And I think this is one of the few Christian books that explore this notion of less what we should do to care for the creation, but what kind of people we need to be if we're going to care for the goodness of the creation. So that's a wonderful, wonderful book. And of course, there's the brand new one. I'm going to call it one of the books of last year, Creation Care Discipleship, Why Earth Keeping is Essential to Christian Discipleship. My next Book Notes newsletter will talk about that again, because I just think it's one of the best books of the year. So that's some of your work you've done. You guys met together, I think, at the Institute for Christian Studies back in the 70s or 80s in Toronto. You've known each other a while, and now you've done this book together. Besides the author titles that I've suggested already, is there anything you want to share with the audience to just say something more about yourself or how you came to collaborate on this book before we get started talking about it directly? What might you say to your audience is to say what brought you to this topic and how you came to work together?
You want to tell the story, Brian, or shall I?
Why don't you tell the story?
I'll keep it brief. We knew each other from our time at Institute for Christian Studies back in the 80s, as you just said, Brian. Brian had already graduated and was moving on to do his PhD, and he was actually working for the Institute and helped recruit me as a student back in the early 80s. And then in the mid to late 90s, we were working on a book together, an idea, independently rather, and I called Brian up, or he called me, I forget the details. And we realized that unbeknownst to us, we were each working on a very similar writing project without realizing it. And we said, instead of, going on our way by ourselves, like many scholars tend to do, we thought we need to work on this together. And that's how the Beyond Homelessness book came to be. I mean, we were reading the same people, quoting from the same texts, in papers that we were working on for conferences, and realized that we ought to collaborate on this book that became Beyond Homelessness.
It was really a little uncanny when we started looking at what each of us was doing. So like we're just thinking each other's thoughts after ourselves. And I had already had, of course, the experience of co-authorship with Richard Middleton, with a couple of books and some essays, and I learned pretty quickly through that I'm a lot better with a colleague because it just doubles our knowledge base, it doubles our what we've read, and we bounce things off of each other. And you know, the way in which we wrote was, and I've done this also with my work with Sylvia Thiesbach, is that the co-author has veto over anything that the other guy wrote. And I can say this, that with all due respect to my beloved wife Sylvia and my dear friend Richard, Steve was the easiest guy to work with. And
I was going to ask that, but then I thought, oh, it could be embarrassing. I better not.
no, I remember the two intense conversations that we had where we disagreed. I remember they happened here at the farm, and one was on the Trinity, and one was on the shape of character virtue ethics, and we sorted ourselves out, and there it is.
And you mentioned the farm. Now, at the time you were first writing this, you were living in Toronto?
When we first started, I was in Toronto. I was a campus minister. We can date how long we've been working on this because we taught a course together at Wycliffe College, and in the summer of 99, 99. And I can always tell you how long we've been working on this because at the end of that course, Sylvia went into labor, and Steve had to fly solo for the last class because our youngest child was born that morning.
Wow. And now you live on an organic farm, Southern Ontario, Russet House Farm. Want to say anything about that quick?
Yeah, Russet House Farm is 50 acres of farmland and forest. We actually just dug, Steve will be happy to hear this, we just dug a half-acre pond in the bottom of one of our fields with Ducks Unlimited for habitat. And we're an off-grid farm, so I didn't know that power was out yesterday in the area until I went into town. And so we do organic farming. We run a tomato sale plant. I've raised cattle and beef and ducks and chickens, and we are accompanied by dogs and cats.
All right. Well, maybe we'll circle back to that in a little bit. The book, of course, we're celebrating tonight is a 15th anniversary edition. And Erdmans came to you and suggested that you reissue it, that you expand it a little bit, which you did, Brian. We'll talk about that later. But for those who don't know anything about the book, the first edition or the new expanded edition, I think maybe we should just talk a little bit about the summary of your thesis. The book's obviously about the housing crisis beyond homelessness. And when people think about homelessness, they think of people without homes and so forth. But you also say in the beginning of the new last chapter that you want to problematize, that's a big academic word, but you want to sort of trouble or problematize what people think of when they think of homelessness, because there's a whole lot more going on in the book than just concern for those who don't have houses. So tell us the thesis of the book and the interconnections of the different themes and topics. If you can do that sort of quickly, how do you kind of explain what's really going on in the big picture of the book?
I'll start and be brief. Homelessness, unfortunately, has multiple forms. The one that most people, I think, associate with it when they hear the term is street people homelessness, what we call socioeconomic homelessness. And that is a huge problem, and since the book was originally published, it's only gotten worse in virtually every city I'm aware of in North America, including here in little old Holland, Michigan. But unfortunately, there are other kinds of homelessness besides the kind of homelessness that we talk about, street people. There's ecological homelessness. Increasingly, especially since the book was first published, we're talking about climate refugees. People are feeling homeless in their home place, whether it's their province or their state or their city or their country, or indeed our home planet Earth. And so there's a kind of what we call ecological homelessness, that we no longer feel at home on our oikos, on our home. And then there's this postmodern, what we call postmodern homelessness, a kind of suspicion for truth claims, suspicion for all kinds of things. I think of one of my U of Chicago teachers, Paul Ricoeur, who talks about a hermeneutics of suspicion, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, and you can add Foucault and these other French philosophers who talk about worldviews and how they're social constructions, and how inevitably, even without our realizing it, we adopt worldviews and ways of seeing the world that are to our own advantage, and are basically power struggles. And we become very suspicious of those kinds of worldviews and kinds of claims that people make. So there's this kind of postmodern form of homelessness that has not much to do with street people, but a lot to do with the kinds of suspicions we have about different points of view in our world today. So one person almost always asks, why is the book so thick, so big, so many pages? Well, it's a big issue and complicated issue with many different kinds of homelessness to analyze and discuss, which is what we do. With each of those three, we have a kind of chapter where we analyze it, and then we have the subsequent next chapter is one where we try to bring the resources of the Christian tradition to bear, scripture, tradition, etc., to provide some ways of addressing those particular kinds of homelessness.
And you have a phrase, I think, that you talk about the homelessness of the well-housed. Now that's kind of counterintuitive. Brian, tell us about Kenny and Kenneth.
Okay.
You start the book with these two characters, somewhat fictional, I suppose, but you probably met guys both like Ken and Kenny. Tell us their story.
Well, the book begins with a narrative of Kenneth and Kenny, and that's we begin the book with problematizing homelessness, because the question is, which of these two guys is homeless? And Kenny is a real guy, and that's his real name, and he lived in a squat in the valley here in Toronto, and I got to know him when I was theologian in residence in Regent Park, which was the first public housing complex ever built in Canada. And I got to meet Kenny there and find out about his life. And he was a crack addict, and he was a little bit of a scary guy. He lived in the valley, as I say. And yet there were various things about Kenny that were of a homemaking character. He'd drag his sorry ass out of that tent every morning, no matter how hungover and messed up he was, and climb up out of the valley and come and cook at the resource center that I was working at for other homeless folks. And he knew what people liked and what they wanted, and he served the community in that way. He would protect people if they were threatened. Now, every now and then, a guy who's a fictional guy, Kenneth, would drive by Kenny on his way to the Don Valley Parkway. And now Kenneth is a fictional character based upon me seeing the inside of his condominium. How I got inside this man's condominium without him being there is really nobody's business, but I did see it. And I was astounded at the opulence of this place. I was blown away by his wine collection. I opened a cupboard, and there were 30 suits. And I got to think, and this was only one of his 3 condos. He had condominiums in other places as well, 3 different cities. So I got to reflecting on which one of these guys is homeless. One guy is overhoused, and yet he doesn't know his neighbors. Even the neighbor on the same floor, he's only met once or twice in the elevator. He's not anxious about whether he's going to get beat up or whether he's going to get some bad drugs. but many spends a lot of time watching the stock market and worried about what's happening in the stock market and the implications that will have on his life and on his family. You know, when the storm came through that washed out Kenny and his brothers, and the cops had to come and save them. I mean, they were really close to nature in that, and you know, for Kenneth, that was just something interesting to watch from the balcony. You know, so we keep on asking ourselves, which one of these guys is homeless, and we conclude that they are both homeless, though they're homeless in different ways. By the time we get to the end of the chapter on postmodernism, quite a number of chapters later, we come to the conclusion that one of the things that all of this homelessness has in common is global capitalism. Global capitalism is at the heart of the modern phenomena of homelessness. There are all kinds of roots of homelessness, no question about that. But we have a upwardly highly mobile society of displacement because of the nature of capitalism. We have rampant unemployment because of the nature of capitalism. We have rampant environmental destruction, ecological homelessness because of the nature of global capitalism. And so that becomes one of the integrating themes, I think, that runs throughout the book.
Well, look, you wrote this 15 years ago, and this postmodern culture of nomadic placelessness, this lack of a sense of place, maybe caused in part by capitalism, this sort of homelessness of the well-housed. That was 15 years ago. When Erdmans came to you and said, we need an update, expand it a little bit, we're going to reissue it and celebrate it and give it a new birth. What did you think of that? Like, have you been proven right? Were you prescient? Are there some things you maybe would have said wrong that you thought maybe you were wrong about? Or has it only gotten worse? It seems to me like everything you said was right, and it's only gotten worse. But was there something you didn't say that you should have said 15 years ago? Just tell us a little bit about how you think this has played out 15 years down the road.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, yeah, the whole thing was devastatingly right. Our analysis was devastatingly right, and it wasn't a brand new, unique analysis. You know, just read our footnotes. We read a lot of folks and learned from a lot of folks. The analysis of socioeconomic homelessness, I mean, that analysis goes back 40 years, and it's the same old stuff. You know, in Toronto and in Canada, I can read reports, you know, done in 1982 that predicted that the number of homeless on the streets in Toronto by 1986 would be at a certain level, and it was. And then in 1987, there'd be another report, and they'd say that by 1995, and it's always been right. It's not rocket science. A lack of affordability, a lack of integrated mental health services, a lack of proper social assistance, a lack of meaningful jobs and that pay a living wage. You put all that together, and you're going to have a lot of people on the street, right? So, and yeah, the rise of homeless encampments throughout North America is only increasing. They just wiped out a number of encampments in Edmonton just the last couple of days. Greta Thunberg rightly says the house is on fire, and we talked about climate change in the book as the overheating of home, and I think that culturally we still have a profound sense of dislocation and wandering and a lack of sense of place and placeness. Now, that's not to say there's not hope. I mean, Greta Thunberg's an incredible symbol of hope, but I also experience incredible hope amongst the students that I've worked with. I'm sure Steve does as well, where there is a beautiful emergence of a sense of wanting to belong in place, wanting to have a sense of community and living within the context of commitment, wanting to know where your food comes from, maybe being involved in making your food. And that's the other kind of thing that we've been doing over the last almost 20 years here at Russell House Farm, is we've been welcoming young adults into our lives, showing hospitality, having folks come to us for 2 weeks or 4 months or a year to learn how to love place, to learn something about what it means to be a homemaker. That's wonderful.
Let me just piggyback a bit on that. I find great hope with the students I have, because while they may be, on average, ecologically illiterate, and I'm trying to make them more literate, what are the trees, what are the animals, what are the other creatures around them, etc. But they're incredibly hope-filled, and they want to do a better job of taking care of our home planet than their parents and their grandparents.
Good.
And
That sense of place is so beautiful that you're talking about. My brother knows every wildflower in his backyard, and names them. And I look out and don't even remember the name of my trees. So that's a good step. We'll talk about hope and practices of hope maybe later. But let me just dig a little deeper on this whole question of the lack of home, the lack of place. In your really, really powerful chapter 4, I think it is, you open this chapter with a story that would be like an expose for people that hadn't heard of it, of the grassy narrows crisis in Canada, an indigenous group of people exiled from their homes. But in the 70s, Reed Paper Company dumped 20,000 pounds of toxic mercury in the water system where these native people live. And you mentioned this and described sort of the troubles with that. But some of the native people you knew said to you, or at least said publicly, that the crisis wasn't just the Reed Paper Company and the mercury in the water in 1970, but it was actually what happened in the 60s when the Canadian government took over their land, sent them out to residential schools, and displaced them from their place. And you use the word domicide. That was a striking word. Tell us what it means and kind of what this cultural genocide of that moment. Why did you start that chapter with such a heavy story?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the story of Grassy Narrows continues to this day, and that community has had a number of successes of late in terms of blocking the logging of their land. But domicide has also been in the news recently in specific reference to Gaza. What's going on in Gaza is nothing less than a domicide. And domicide and genocide always go together. When you are simply attempting to wipe out all possibility of life. But the domicide of colonial powers in North America can be as violent, but generally tend to be more insidious. So you take the children away from their homes and the trap lines and their lifeways, and you send them to residential school where they are forced to learn a certain kind of Christianity and forced to deny essentially their identity as indigenous. It's kind of like the Book of Daniel, You take these Israelites into the empire, and you change their names, and you change their language, and you change their food, and you change their cultural practices, and that is a way to essentially strip them of home and to assimilate them. So what happened?
Memory. You strip them of their memory.
That's right. Which is why, by the streams of Babylon, we hung up our harps and refused to sing. Because we're not going to sing the songs of Zion as quaint little folk songs for our Babylonian captors. If we're going to sing the songs of Zion, they will be songs, as Bob Marley would tell us, of resistance. Right? They'll be songs of resistance. So what happened in the Grassy Narrows community and communities across Canada was as seemingly an act of colonial kindness, tribes were forcibly moved from their traditional lands and their traditional settlements and brought to the end of a road in which the government set up housing for them. And the housing was on a grid just like any suburban housing. And the housing was always substandard. The biggest question of justice for Indigenous tribe communities in Canada today is a real simple one. Can they have clean water? Can we produce clean water for folks? Is that too much for us to be able to do? So the infrastructure sucked, but most importantly, it was taking them away from their traditional lands where vision quests would happen, lands that were taken to be and understood and experienced as sacred, and put into sort of a no man's land in square boxes on a grid, on straight lines. And if we know anything about Indigenous spirituality, the circle is everything. So simply putting people in boxes on straight lines functions as a deep disorientation and no sense of being placed. This isn't place. And so that got us thinking about how home is certainly more than a house, but it's also that housing needs to serve homemaking. And so then we talk in that chapter about the relationship of worldviews to the making of home. And in creative developments that I've seen, including in Indigenous housing, these kinds of things, these kinds of understandings of the spirituality of home and the symbolism of home, and home as a place where stories can be honored and developed, where certain kinds of practices and activities happen, where certain symbols are prevalent. These kinds of things are now common in some of the most creative developments that I've seen.
You use the phrase, maybe you're quoting somebody else, but that buildings have pedagogical power. So worldviews shape us, shape our buildings, and then the buildings in turn shape us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's really from a book called Theology of the Built Environment by who wrote that?
Groninger.
Yeah, Borger. Gorringe, and Gorringe's book, Theology of the Built Environment, was very helpful to us. Now, one of the things that was great about this project is that Steve and I had to learn different languages, not French, German, and Hebrew, but the languages of the social sciences, the language of economics, the languages of architecture and of geography.
Mm-hmm.
And the first paper that we gave on all of this, we gave to the Canadian Theological Society,
mm-hmm.
and we talked about theology of home and place, and it didn't go over that great. The conversation wasn't that great. Steve then left, and I went searching for other groups to hang out with, and I showed up with the geographers. And I spent a couple of days with the geographers. And at a certain point, one of the geographers actually said, "You're a theologian. What are you doing here?" And I said, "You guys understand the spirituality of place. The theologians across campus don't. I want to talk with you guys."
Mm-hmm.
Listen to this quote from the book. It's on the top of 135, if you don't mind me reading just this little part. It says, "Whether one lives in a traditional longhouse, a split-level rancher in a North American suburb, a public housing apartment in Toronto, an old-order Mennonite community, or a clan compound in Nigeria, it will profoundly shape how one experiences the world. But each of these dwellings, each of these built environments, is itself an expression of the vision of life, the overarching narrative and the guiding symbols and the cultural practices of those who had the power to construct these sites of habitation." That just sort of summarizes some of what's going on in the book. I think you sometimes use in big language, call it the phenomenology of home. But to get at the question of homelessness, you have to ask what a home even is. And to get at the question of home, you have to analyze a bit of who the heck makes homes and in why they do it and in what ways they do it. And what do you do with those who are in exile from their homes? That question of exile just becomes so important in all this because some folks have been literally removed from their homes.
That emphasizes the importance we place in chapter 2. We spent a whole chapter just on what we call the phenomenology of home, right? If you're talking about homelessness, that implies you have some understanding of home, but home shows up in many different ways. We identify at least 8 different kinds of meanings of home, and what home does in different ways. And you're suggesting one very important one there, that our architecture shapes us in ways we're often not even aware of.
Steve, the next chapter it's almost head spinning, but it's so connected. I love the book is properly complex and delightfully complicated and involves so much. That's why it's so good. But after this section on place and home, there's the ecological homelessness chapter. And you've already told us a bit about that, the environmental crisis and the houses on fire, our house, our oikos.
Yeah.
But is there a more direct connection between ecological homelessness and the domestic poverty we see, and even the overhoused homelessness of the nomads that are flying around like Kenneth? What's the direction in that very next chapter that our care for creation is related to all this stuff?
Well, there are all kinds of connections, I think, between the different kinds of homelessness. If people are homeless because of, as Byron was saying, because of how we structure our economy, kind of global capitalism that he was referring to, there are all kinds of assumptions made and implications that flow from that particular way of organizing our society. Environmental degradation is a, quote, externality, according to Adam Smith and the followers of neoclassical economics, right? Externality is just some other thing. You don't really pay much attention to that. And a number of environmental economists, and that's now a legitimate subfield within economics, have talked about how we need to capture those costs somehow. And they're not really any externalities. There are real costs that need to be somehow monetized. Now, other people argue against that. Can you monetize everything? Can you provide a legitimate and accurate financial value for a piece of property or a bunch of animals? So that's another question. But the point is that there are ways to try to find ways that we can value things that do in fact have value, and not just instrumental value, use value, but intrinsic value. If you read Psalm 104, or again, the first and last chapters of the Bible begins and ends with rivers and trees, after all, right? Genesis 1 and 2, Revelation 21 and 22. God seems to value all kinds of things besides what we humans do in our economic decisions. So if those things have value in and for themselves, then we, followers of Jesus, ought to value things intrinsically, for their intrinsic value, not just for their usefulness to us, whatever that may be.
I forget where you say
there are a lot of connections between, I think, ecological kinds of homelessness and socioeconomic homelessness.
I forget where you actually say this, or maybe I'm just reading between the lines, but it seems that there is this argument that is made by some, fewer than used to be, but some still, that say we're bound for heaven. God is going to rapture us all to some ethereal place in the sky. And even though Revelation 21 and 22 doesn't say that, they still have this sort of fly-away mentality that therefore we don't really have to care much about this world because it's all going to burn up anyway. Is that one of the reasons that we finally, at the end of the day, have homelessness? Because nobody gives a rip about anything anyway, because we're so heaven-bound. So our eschatology fits into this. That's our view of the end times fits into this conversation too, doesn't it?
Sure does. One of the most common talks I've been giving around North America in the last 10 years is called Eschatology Shapes Ethics. Our view of the future, whatever it is, shapes our view of the present. And for many Christians, and I speak autobiographically, growing up in a home where I was taught about the rapture, and then I went to seminary, learned some Greek, and actually read 2 Peter 3 and Revelation 21, 22, and realized there is no such thing as the rapture in the New Testament. The vision in the New Testament is about heaven, New Jerusalem, coming down to earth, right? It's about the recreation of all things on earth. It's a very earthy and earthly view of the future, God's good future. So But that's not the view of many Christians, and many people in the church are taught that, we're going to be souls floating around in heaven somewhere, and the earth will be destroyed, burned up to nothing, to use the famous mistranslation of 2 Peter 3:10, when in fact the text says, Eureka, Eurythesetai, the earth and the works upon it will be discovered, disclosed. That's what the text actually says, but good luck finding an English translation. There are none that actually get it right. The best is the Dutch. Zullen gevonden worden, will be found. They actually got it right in the Dutch Bible. So that's just one example of a biblical text that has sort of underwritten this escapist view of God's good future. And that obviously has these negative environmental effects. Yeah, why care for creation if it's all going to be burned up to nothing and we're going to be souls floating around in heaven?
One guy that has helped us all understand this a bit, even though he's not a theologian proper, would be the farmer, poet, essayist, Wendell Berry. You guys both quote Wendell Berry in your respective sections. There's one of his books, one of his great books. Tell us about your affinity for Wendell Berry. For those that may not know, has he shaped your understanding a bit, and how does he figure into this book, if only between the lines, but sometimes literally in quotations? What do you think of Saint Wendell?
Well, my goodness, Wendell Berry is pretty crucial to a lot that we're doing. Not as crucial as the scriptures. So I want to say something about the scriptures for a second, then I'll come back to Wendell Berry.
That's one of my very next questions, actually.
Oh, then I'll talk to Wendell Berry. I'll let you come to the question. If the crisis is one of placelessness, then you need poets and essayists and novelists of place. And so somebody like Wendell Berry or also Barbara Kingsolver, become very important dialogue partners for us. Now, what's great about Wendell Berry is he has this breadth and scope, so that he can also take on the dynamics of global capitalism and the dynamics of industrialization, and he does so from a way which is not very exegetically rooted. He doesn't exegete scripture very much, but a biblical worldview simply permeates everything that he writes. I mean, he talks about environmental destruction isn't just stupid; it is the most horrid of blasphemies. Now, it's blasphemy because creation's holy. So the destruction of creation, domicide, the devaluation of habitats, places of habitation, it isn't just economically and ecologically dumb. It is blasphemy, and so that's another place where Berry actually helps me to hear even more profoundly both the scriptures and indigenous understandings of the world, and indigenous understandings of homelessness as fundamentally a spiritual matter. That's the discourse in Canada around homelessness. When indigenous folks are talking, basically they're saying to all their liberal social justice friends, you can't miss that this is a spiritual crisis, and that's why we need to return to our own spiritual roots, our own spiritual stories. I really want to talk about the scriptures, so I'll ask the question, Byron. You're muted, my friend.
I just said, Steve, do you want to add in anything about Wendell Berry?
This, my beat-up copy of Sex, Economy, Freedom, Community, which a student once commented and said, boy, that covers it all, doesn't it? I said, really? Probably so. Here's a quote from Berry, page 34. The idea that we live in something called, quote unquote, the environment is utterly preposterous. This word came into use because of the pretentiousness of learned experts who were embarrassed by the religious associations of, quote, creation, and who thought world, quote unquote, too mundane. But environment means that which surrounds or encircles us. It means a world separate from ourselves, outside us. The real state of things, of course, is far more complex and intimate and interesting. The world that environs us, that is around us, is also within us. We are made of it. We eat, drink, and breathe it. It is bone of our bone and flesh of our flesh. It is also a creation, capital C, a holy mystery, made for and to some extent by creatures, some but not by no means all of whom are humans. Creation, capital C, a holy mystery. There you go, from St. Wendell.
That's right. And that's why you've said, I think in your last virtue book, that you don't even prefer to talk about the environmental sciences, but you're an ecologist.
Yes.
The unity of ecology rather than environment.
Yeah, language shapes how we think, right? And environment, again, I think Barry has it right. It's, it's immediately dualistic. It separates us from the world around us, whereas ecological is about the oikos, of which we are an intimate and integral part. So I refuse to use environment when I have the choice. Obviously, when you're talking about environmental studies as an academic discipline, you're not going to make that name change right away. But I prefer to talk about, again, anything that points at the fact that this is our home, which I think, again, etymologically, oikos does, ecological, etc. So
Calvin College Press did that little book called Beyond Stewardship, suggesting that stewardship language is even not adequately biblical. And you have a great chapter in there.
Yep, nice
there it
book.
is, Beyond Stewardship.
Collaborative efforts by a bunch of scholars. Yeah, well, that's part of the argument I make and others that we ought to move beyond stewardship because the notion of steward, typical notion, again, often is a kind of dualistic anthropology that suggests that we're not really creatures, we're not really animals, we're something different, and therefore the rest of creation doesn't have the same value or ought to be devalued. And we need to steward it. Often that tends to be high-handed in certain ways. Again, not really a kind of caretaking. Again, language is important. Whoever defines the terms wins the argument, to quote an old bumper sticker I once saw. So,
and you're a wilderness guy. You love to go out and just enjoy the creation, the wilderness trips and canoeing and stuff. So you get this kind of in your experience of the beauty of creation for the beauty of the earth, that old hymn that you titled your book.
And I find that's what really moves students. I can yap all I want in the classroom, but I take them outside to learn some trees or go on a May-term trip in the Adirondacks, and they're out often for the first time immersed in a natural environment. That's when the awe and the wonder, I talk about those as a virtue. That's when that sort of gets evoked. And there's nothing or little I can do in class that can do that. But there's much in the natural world, including domesticated world. Go to Brian's farm, Brian Sylvia's place. That's an ooh and ah kind of place too, in a different way than looking at Niagara Falls, but still seeing the wonder and the intricacy and the beauty of the natural world.
Well, I hope people that are still listening in, there's over 100 and some of us gathered here, but I hope we hear some more comments. We'll pause in a minute and have some conversation with some of your questions. But I got to ask this. There are these interludes between the book, in between the chapters, and they're very creative biblical reflections. Brian, I think of the Targums you did in the Colossians book, which were kind of contemporary poetic paraphrases of Old Testament scriptures, as the early church used to do, as the Greeks did. So I'm excited by these interludes. And I tell this story sometimes, and I'm sort of embarrassed just to tell it again, but I might as well for our listening audience here. There was a review, I don't know if it was Amazon or someplace, but one guy said, and I know who he is, and he loves the book, but just to stir the pot a little bit, he said, the book is really pretty long, and it has in between every chapter these little Bible studies, and it would be a better, stronger book if you just got rid of those little Bible studies. Well, I remember, Brian, how offended you were by that. And you said, if you take the Bible pieces out of it, you don't have the same book anymore. They're the connecting thread that holds the whole thing together. So let's talk about the scriptures, and let's talk about how you use the scriptures in this book. We've talked about sociology, we've talked about poverty, we've talked about homelessness and ecology and Wendell Berry. Well, how's the Bible fit into all this stuff?
I'm so glad you asked. I mean, I think that particular reader might have also just been off-put by the mixing of genres. right? So Sylvia and I do this in Colossians Remixed and in Romans Disarmed, and some folks just sort of like, what the heck was that? All of a sudden there's this creative targum. It's like a poem, or all of a sudden there's a lament, or then there's a narrative in first person, and it's not just a straight up prose kind of discursive book. And that was intentional. Now when we got to working on this book, we actually had the conversation as to whether we would just make sure that every chapter is loaded with scripture and always bring scripture in, or whether we would do something kind of creative and unique. And we decided to go with the latter route. And in chapter 1, there's a summary of the whole biblical story. Mm-hmm. And that summary basically says that while we have traditionally understood scripture as creation, fall, and redemption, that's a perfectly good understanding of the overall arc of the biblical narrative. Another look demonstrates that this is a story of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation, home, homelessness, and homecoming, habitat, displacement, homecoming, homemaking, homefulness, however you want to talk about it. So then, the point here is that I guess I want to say two things. The first is, as I look at organizations and movements that are and church groups that are attempting to address the questions of homelessness, there are two things that I want to say. The first is, the deeper your phenomenology of home, the deeper and more profound your understanding of the nature of home, the more creative will be your solutions, and the more insightful will be your analysis of the problems, right? So this is why this understanding of what is home is so important. And in the postscript to the new book, to the new edition, we talk about various authors, such as Miroslav Volf and Ryan McAnally-Lintz, and in their book, The Home of God, and others. I was just reading a book called Shelter Theology. And all of these books end up having an implicit phenomenology of home. Mm-hmm. So also the great work done in the Church of England in their magnificent report on housing and homemaking. There is an implicit phenomenology there. But also, the second thing is, the deeper your understanding of biblical themes of home, homelessness, and homecoming, the more profound will be your analysis, and the more hopeful will be your alternatives. And so that's why we want to spend a lot of time talking about the scriptures, helping folks find their way into the scriptures, because frankly, that if home is rooted in story, that is our grounding story. Mm-hmm. And some stories are not homemaking stories. The story of colonialism is a story of domicide. I'll just say it. The story of Zionism is a story of domicide. Right? There are some stories that actually are misdirected and misinformed and deform our lives. The biblical the theological understanding of Christian hope is all about going to heaven, is a domicidal story. It's a story that cannot, never will, give us the spiritual resources to be homemakers in our world. Mm-hmm. And that's why, Steve and I are so happy to have someone like N.T. Wright now, over the last many number of years as a deep ally in teaching a new creation theology. And of course, we are all indebted to Richard Middleton's A New Heaven and New Earth. This is the book of theological and exegetical analysis that gets to the heart of a theology of homemaking for us.
Preach it, brother.
I have that very book in my notes right here to say, talk about Richard's book. So I'm glad you waved that around, which gets at this renewed earth and the restoration of creation that God promises, and that's the story we're a part of. I learned that from Transforming Vision, by the way, that great first book that you wrote. That's where we first learned that stuff, and that puts us on a countercultural collide with the forces of modernity and secularism and capitalism and so forth, because they don't buy that either. So the flyaway spiritual pietists don't get it, and the capitalists don't get it. The Hebrew biblical worldview is really the most rich, fruitful, and finally hopeful story that's going to shape our understandings of home. That's what you're saying. So the Bible stuff is important practically because it's God's word, but because it's true. This really is the story that we want to inhabit that's going to bear fruit in forming. Here's a question from one of the audience members that chimed in, one of our friends from online here, that said, are there stories of people that are doing this kind of work that are actually helping to solve this problem? Brian, you sent an article from the New York Times about your friend down in Texas. You both have visited this guy down in Austin. Why don't you tell us, just as an example of a hopeful illustration of a guy that gets it, that's doing this kind of work? Tell us about your friend down in Austin.
Here's the front page of New York Times just the other day, 2 days ago. There it is. It's 3 pages long. There are 12 different photographs. So go ahead, Brian. I just want to say, front page of New York Times.
Well, Alan Graham is an amazing entrepreneur, prophet, and crank. In the Wendell Berry sense of another turning of the crank. And Alan is a developer, and at a certain point in the 90s, he had a spiritual renewal in his life, and that spiritual renewal led him where the Spirit tends to lead, which is to amongst the most vulnerable. And so he started a ministry called Mobile Loaves and Fishes in Austin, where he had these catering trucks, and he went and found the homeless and created community and would bring food and clothes and stuff to folks. But he knew that wasn't enough, that what people needed was homes, that they needed housing. But he could also see the rate of recidivism in housing first models, that people were getting housing. You get a bachelor apartment, often suburb somewhere, and you're back on the street in 3 weeks. And why would that be? Well, maybe because there's no community out where that bachelor apartment was, and your community is on the streets. So he's looking for a way. This is in the 2000s. He's looking for a way to imagine what a homeless a community of homemaking would look like. And if we only sold one copy of Beyond Homelessness, and it was to Alan Graham, then it was totally worth it. He got the book in 2008 and read the book and was animated by the book, and especially was just captivated by the phenomenology of home. He said, oh, wait a second, if I want to help people find home, these are the characteristics that we're looking for. Mm-hmm. So he went to work, and he started to build these communities. And they're not transitional housing. These are communities of folks who were chronically homeless. That means at least 1 year living rough on the streets or in the shelters, at least, and most of them many more years than that, and inviting them into a rental community where the rents are set at a rate where folks can actually afford to pay. And it's a mixed community of tiny homes, recreational vehicles, and
small trailers.
Small trailers, small trailer type homes. And Steve and I have both been there. Unfortunately, never together. Hasn't ever worked for us to be together. And it is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
It has its struggles, but that's called human community. And by the time Alan is finished with this development on the northeast part of Austin, or wherever it is, mm-hmm. There will be 2,000 units. So he's building a village, mm-hmm. and that is being replicated using smaller ways in other cities throughout North America. And there's going to be one in Bangor, Maine, and they're going to call it Homefulness Village. The term homefulness, and it was the potential inhabitants, these chronically homeless folks, who said, "Let's call it homefulness." And they hadn't read our book; that just came up. Yeah. So this is one place of excitement.
And they're getting grants. He's raising millions of dollars. I mean, this is a large scale project that still isn't wiping out the problem of unhoused folks in Austin, but it's making a huge dent and giving new life to tons of people. Missional people, he calls them, are folks that have had traditional jobs and have been more stable in their lives, have moved in with them to sort of be helpers along the way.
Kind of like the move in, kind of like the move in movement, right?
Yeah.
You know, just moving in. But here you have a community, and folks are invited to come and live a life of accompaniment. And what's interesting is I think Alan's really, the guy's a libertarian. Doesn't really believe in government, but all of a sudden you start doing stuff really well, the government money comes and finds you. He doesn't go looking for it; it comes to him.
Let me just say that we talk about this in the postscript of the new edition, starting on page 346. There's a 4 or 5 page section, including a drawing from Jeremiah the street corner artist. It's in the book. So all I have to say is there's a little section at the end of the postscript where we talk about this amazing creative community work that Alan's been doing in Texas.
And his book is called Welcome Homeless, and the less is crossed out, published by Thomas Nelson. So that's a very readable book about his story. And I'm so glad that he connected with you too. And it's a good example of a community that's building affordable and culturally meaningful housing for folks. There's another question here that came in that said they would like to hear the authors, you guys, reflect on this increase in sweeps. You seemed to mention that earlier, Brian, sort of with disdain, and in these encampments being shoved aside, maybe even in light of this idea of domicile. What do you do about this problem, though? Seriously, what do you make of all that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to underestimate the problem. It is a problem. And, you know, would I want, you know, a homeless encampment just to show up on my farm? Probably not, you know. Would I consider trying to do some housing on the farm? I'd consider that. So I get it. I get it that this is it's scary for folks when you have that many people, especially people with high acuity, you know, with multiple problems, lots of drug use, possible violence. I get it. And yet there is the issue of the right to housing. And so when the authorities come in and want to move people out, the question is this an infringement of their right to housing? Mm-hmm. The United States has acknowledged a right to housing for many, many years. Canada just did in 2019. We finally got around to acknowledging that is a human right. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to be moving folks out of an encampment, you have to have housing available for them. You simply have to have housing available for them. At least it has to be offered to them. Now, not permanent housing, because what they're in isn't permanent housing, but there has to be a way out and a path towards housing before you just go moving people out. The other thing that we talk about in the postscript is we talk about, based upon our friend Bud Osborne and his poetry, we talk about both the resilience and the creativity of folks who are unhoused, but also the way in which in encampments and even in an alleyway, home is made. That home gets reconstructed in different sites. Just the other day, I was talking to a woman, and she talked about going looking for her brother when he was 18, who had disappeared. And they found him, you know, underneath the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto, in an encampment. And he wouldn't leave because he said, I have a better sense of home here than I do in Lindsay, Ontario. Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly enough, under that Gardiner Expressway 2 years ago, Sketch, which is an arts organization that we talk about in the last chapter of the book, Sketch had an installation called Reconstructions of Home, where they brought back folks from that encampment back in the 90s and had them do artwork about how they found home under the expressway in that encampment. So I think we need to learn something about homemaking from those who are unhoused.
Mm-hmm. That's even one of the questions here. Somebody asks, I'll just read what the listener said. They said, I would love to hear reflection on the ways in which maybe literally unhoused people perhaps are more spiritually housed because of their reliance on one another and their dependence on nature, even if it's not chosen. There's something about their being in tune with the outdoors because they're stuck in it, and their need to rely on each other. And is there something spiritual, maybe more traditional suburbanites need to learn from our homeless friends? Is there something to that, or is that romantic?
I think there's something to it, and I'd be scared of the possible romanticism of that.
Yeah.
You know, with being unhoused comes all kinds of other problems. Health problems come with it. Frostbite, violence comes on the street. Mental health problems only increase when you're unhoused. Addiction increases when you're unhoused because one finds home in the needle. Having said that, there is a sense in which we do see communities coming together. But often they are communities also of protection, right? I mean, it's a group of friends who are going to stick together because there's safety in numbers. And do they become close? Yes, they do. There's something close about that camaraderie. But I wouldn't want to romanticize life on the streets for a second.
Just reemphasize the caveat about romanticism. On the other hand, it's again just thinking of the times when I've been outside for a long period of time on a trip, camping or whatever. There's just a sense of, I find myself, my prayer life increases or improves, you might say, because there are just more things I can't control. And I pray to God that, we'll be safe on this hike or paddle or whatever. And so there's a way that one's own vulnerability perhaps is exposed in ways that could be healthy in terms of promoting a kind of trust and confidence in God. But again, not at the cost of romanticizing, homeless folks and saying, oh, yeah, it's to their benefit or something like that. So I don't want to go there, but I just want to say my own experience of being more vulnerable often is a spiritually enriching one.
And let me just add something to that. I'm reading this book, I can't remember the author's name right now, from Duke, called Shelter Theology, and where the author is writing about the kind of lived theology that she experiences in the prayer service at the Durham homeless shelter. And it's very, very real, very pious. And one of the things that I've come across is there's a certain kind of spirituality in language, and I had a student actually write a thesis on this. He was in that course with us, that very first course. Dion Oxford, and he went and he founded a shelter, the best shelter there is in Toronto. And Dion had to write a thesis, and he came to me, he said, I want to write about angels. I said, what about angels? Angels on the street. Because his experience was that the most vulnerable folks in his life, the sex workers and the rubbies and the addicts, they seem to have angelic experiences all the time. Whereas his friends in comfortable middle-class churches never experience angels. And so the question was, are these real experiences of angels? Is it romanticizing and sentimental? Somebody who's nice and they're an angel? Are they psychotic episodes? Or are they all of the above at the very same time? and came to the conclusion that no, these folks in that experience of vulnerability do end up having angelic kinds of experiences with greater frequency, and I believe that's true.
Well, look, we're over an hour now. There's a couple of other questions that seem to be sort of humming around these same topics. One, people even suggest you have a TED talk that you guys do together that could somehow get this word out. The book is rich. I would encourage people to buy it if they haven't yet. Hearts and Minds has it at 20% off. But, there is just so much here. There's Bible study. There's these biblical narratives that are so creative, worth the price of the book. The themes of hope that come through, even though there's a lot of hard cultural analysis and critique of economics and so forth, it ends. The original book ended with this dramatic vision of hope and homecoming. I don't know which of you wrote that, or if you wrote it together, but the ending is just ecstatic. And then the ending of the new postscript, they call it postscript, but it's a whole new chapter that Brian mostly wrote and describes the Austin situation and so forth. This where is home and this vision of Isaiah and the promises of God. I mean, it's enough to make you weep. You don't hear preaching like this in most churches, frankly. And these guys get it. So I am really, really big on this big fat book. And we have it on sale. And it's an honor to have you guys with us. Let's close up with just this quick question. Do you have any kind of comments you'd like to close with, Brian and Steve, around either your own practices, like what you're doing nowadays, how you live this out, how this book has affected you, or maybe just a word of hope of how people can take some next steps and live into this and yet stay hopeful? What words of depart do you have for us to bless us as we bring down?
I'll start. Much could be said there, but I'll just start as a member of the Hope Green Team, the informal name for the Hope Sustainability Advisory Committee, which is comprised of faculty, staff, and students here at Hope, been around for over 15 years. And that is simply pick one thing and do it. Don't feel overcome by what is often felt to be the overwhelming nature of especially environmental or ecological issues. Just find one thing you can do, and maybe find a friend or two. Don't do it by yourself, and just do it. And we've been doing that at Hope in various ways and trying to make this a more sustainable place, among other things. And then when that's done, find one more. Don't be overwhelmed by what seems like the intractability or the massive nature of some of these issues, but make your neighborhood a more friendly place and tackle one of these or more of these kinds of homelessness in your own community.
Well, thank you. And Hope, of course, is in Holland, Michigan, a college where you teach. It's in Western Michigan, beautiful little town, and you're doing that there. For what it's worth, one of the ancient monks talked about stability as a virtue. In other words, staying put. And so in a certain sense, to pick out a topic and work on it implies you're going to be committed to a place, at least for a while. So I hear that in your answer too, that it'll have some stability. In other words, just don't be moving around every 6 months to a new job or a new place, but find some friends and get started and dig in and get some roots.
We moved 11 times the first 13 years of our marriage, my wife and I, all graduate school related stuff. And we've been now in Holland for 30 years, and it's what a difference. I mean, I'm a living example of the mobility, not chosen for that reason, but largely education driven early on. But now, and we've stayed here when we could have moved other places, in large part because we want to be committed to this place.
Good.
So I'll tell you a story. It's also about Dion Oxford, who I mentioned earlier. Dion was speaking in my Beyond Homelessness class a number of years later, and somebody said to him, "Look, I live in Oakville. That's a suburb, and what can I do to help you in downtown Toronto?" And Dion said, "Well, start with, I don't really need you as a volunteer, and I don't want you as a volunteer because volunteers tend to be too much work for us to train them so that they can actually do some good in the shelter. So, but I'll take your money. Send me as much money as you want. But if you really want to do something, here's what you should do. I want your house on your suburban block to be the house of hospitality. I want your house to be where all the kids come to play, and where the teenagers show up. And I want that, if down the street there's trouble in a family, I want your house to be the kind of house where maybe that kid runs to your place before running downtown, or perhaps the dad shows up with tears in his eyes and saying, "My house is falling apart," and looks to you for that kind of assistance. And I think that to create that type of those households of homemaking, it'll be manifest in the way in which your garbage gets put out and what shows up in your garbage. It'll be manifest in the plants in your front yard, in whether there's a vehicle or what kind of vehicle there is in the driveway. It'll be manifest in where does the community barbecue happen and who's shoveling whose walks. Be homemakers.
Mhm.
This is the kind of stuff that's in the book, friends. There's heavy philosophical studies, and there's beautiful, challenging advice, and there's lots of pop culture, poetry, Bruce Cockburn music. This is a heck of a great book. You're going to want to get it. I'm just honored to be with these folks tonight. William, you're from Erdman's and made this whole thing happen. It was your company that came to them and said, let's do an expanded edition. And this 15th anniversary edition now came out through Erdman's, a legacy, great Christian publisher in Grand Rapids. Maybe you can tell us just a few more things to close us out here tonight.
Sure. Thanks, Byron. And again, thank you, Steve and Brian, for making the time to be here. Byron, kudos to you for bringing us this idea. And I'm ecstatic that we had the chance to, one, publish an updated edition that expands and connects on what's been published already in the 2008 edition. Yeah, there you go, Byron. But also to have you here tonight to discuss with a live audience just the ins and outs of this book. Byron and folks, maybe you can agree with me, people that work in the book industry or adjacent to it, one of the banes of our existence is the fact that there's just so much good literature out there. And, it is a thick book, I'll be honest, but I have perused it a little bit. But I just want to say, Brian and Steve, that just hearing you guys talk along with Byron and then the questions that were asked by the audience too has just given me a great depth and a new way to think about the culture of displacement that's so prevalent in today's society. So before we close, Byron, there was a book giveaway, and I want to hold true to that. So our winner of tonight's book giveaway, Samuel Chang. I don't know if you are still here. If you are, great. If not, that's okay. I will be shooting you an email. Congratulations.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I'll be
Where's he
shooting you
live?
an email.
Where's he live?
I actually am unsure.
Okay.
I do not know that information. So
Please.
I will be sending him an email.
Geography of nowhere.
So be on the lookout for an email from me so we can coordinate, so we can get that gratis copy sent your way.
If he orders one from us, I'll tell him no, that he's the winner.
Okay, yes. We'll cover all the bases for sure. I also wanted to bring up something cool that Brian Walsh is doing. He has an interactive online course titled Inhabiting the Scriptures, Finding Home in a World of Displacement. And through his organization, Bible Remixed, there's more information below. From what I've been hearing from Brian about the class, it sounds like this will be very fruitful for anyone looking to deepen their understanding of what home truly means in a society where displacement is so prevalent. So I highly encourage you to go check out www.bibleremixed.ca, the link on the bottom of the screen. And if you're willing and able, please register for that class. Sounds great. I think I might even do that just as a continuation of the conversation that was happening tonight. And then on a last note, I did want to share with you all that Erdman's has been revamping our online presence. If you haven't seen already, we've completely overhauled and updated our website. It looks brand new. And somebody from my sales and marketing team has said that it is from this century, which is true. So please go check out, our website, erdmans.com. It's brand new. You can purchase the book there or from Byron's Hearts and Minds bookstore for a discount of 20% off. Additionally, if you are somebody who has received the snail mail newsletter from Erdman's, we have revitalized that. It was called The Logo, and it was our monthly newsletter. So that has been digitized. We have promoted the live stream on that, but if you are not already, please go ahead and subscribe to our email newsletter, The Logo, for exclusive content access, and so you never miss another event like this. Again, huge thanks to Byron Borger of Hearts and Minds Bookstore for hosting and helping me coordinate this event. Many thanks to our authors, Brian and Steve, for making the time to be here tonight. And thanks to our audience for attending. We hope everybody has a great night. Take care of yourselves and be sure to go grab a copy of this great book. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great to see you guys.
Yeah, likewise, Byron. God's
Stay in touch.
blessings. Yeah.
Thank you.